Hi everyone, I am Kayla Stajkovic. I am excited to be joining you virtually in Belgrade today for this conference. For the next few minutes or so, I will be talking to you about large language models. I'm sure this is a phrase that you have heard, so let's dive in and talk a little bit about what it means, how it could be useful to you, and more at a conceptual level, where does it fit in the big picture of research? So as researchers, we've always worked with words, but usually it's the researchers using words to write items. Participants then respond with numbers on a scale. But LLM lets us actually treat the language as the data itself. When people talk about LLMs, they often jump straight to capabilities, things like prediction, generation, automation. But conceptually, what an LLM model actually does is much simpler and much more useful to researchers. An LLM model enables us to systematically discover meaning by learning which words, phrases, and ideas tend to co-occur in context. Now, it doesn't read the way humans read, and it doesn't interpret meaning the way humans interpret meaning. What it does interpret is statistical regularities, how people express ideas, reason through problems, justify actions, and frame their reality. And that distinction matters because what an LLM does not learn is meaning. It learns structure. It enables researchers, not the model, to understand patterns in relationships, identify latent dimensions, and extract meaning through a theoretical lens. There are two places where meaning happens, one with the humans that are generating the language, and then on the back end with the researcher who's using theory to guide their interpretation of it. The LLM gives us cluster and structure, but meaning is derived by applying theory. Now, traditionally, we've relied heavily on scales, and they're great, but they're also compressed. They take complex things and simplify them to a number. They don't give us the how. LLMs enable us to better understand the world in terms of how. Words are a really powerful medium through which we can derive meaning. At least three reasons. First is resolution. They capture nuance like ambivalence, uncertainty, contradiction, things that people can't or simply won't compress into a single number. Second, it gives us process. It reveals how people reason, not just the ultimate judgment that they arrive to or what box they check at the end. And third is context. Constructs can mean different things depending on who's saying them, why they're saying them, and what the setting is. But a scale too often strips that away. Language preserves it. It tells us how things happen. Large language models, they're not just tools. It's a whole new class of methods, and they allow us to model meaning at scale without discarding context. They let us operationalize constructs that have always been theoretically rich, but empirically difficult to measure. Think about moral reasoning or communality and agency. These are constructs that we've theorized about for decades, but they've been really hard to pin down, especially with traditional measurement. But LLM can help us map those constructs into what's appearing in language, helping us look at how they analyze across situations and people. And we can do this without pretending that meaning is fixed or static. But as I've said, LLMs don't replace theory. They're simply a new measurement system that we didn't have before. A few important caveats. Pattern detection is not theory contribution. Correlation is not mechanisms. LLMs on their own cannot specify causal processes, define constructs normatively, or tell us what ought to matter. Sure, an LLM is going to give you a beautifully precise answer to a poorly formed question. And that's not a technical failure. It's a theoretical one. The model will always return structure, but only theory can tell us what that structure means. LLM models can advance theory in at least three powerful ways that I see. The first one is new construct discovery. They could help us identify overlooked dimensions, surface boundary conditions, or notice patterns that our theory just didn't predict. Second is construct refinement. They help us test assumptions that might be built into scales. For example, maybe there's a construct that we thought was one-dimensional, but with an LLM, we find out there's two meaningful dimensions here, or it behaves differently in this context versus this context. The third is theory dynamics. This is where things get especially interesting and exciting because LLMs enable us to track how meaning shifts across time and space, and we can model linguistic trajectories, not just static snapshots. LLMs are most powerful when they're constrained by theory and used to pressure test it. This is not a revolution, it's just a reorientation. LLMs don't change what theory is, but they change what it can touch. They're not a shortcut. They're an invitation to build better theory using the language that theory has always been about. Because in the end, theory has always lived in words.